Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Crypto Entrepreneurs Podcast with your host, Charles. Enjoy.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 40 of the Crypto Entrepreneurs Podcast. It's your host, Charles the ETH, and today we're going to be sitting down with Blooded Shiller, and we're going to be discussing a couple topics. So if you're on Twitter, you've probably seen this man recently. He is absolutely killing the game. During the last trading competition, I saw him at the top of the leaderboards, and he hit a 23x, turning $100 into $2,300 in the span of 48 hours. So he's just an absolute madman. And today we're going to be sitting down to discuss, his trading strategy, what it takes to win these trading competitions, especially the shorter ones. And then right at the end, we're going to give you some tips on how to become a profitable trader. So let's get into it. So before we really jump into things, can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you were doing before you started trading crypto, just so we can kind of have an idea of who you are?
Yeah, of course. So prior to trading full time, I ran a business. The best way to describe that is I was a educational consultant. So I designed a lot of educational material for some big corporate companies. So I would be the person they would contact in order to basically prepare material to train their staff. So if they had 1,000 staff to train in a certain topic, then I would be the one creating the material for that. So that was my background, was like primarily in education. And then about 2 years ago, I swapped over to full-time trading. So I kind of dropped the business and made the leap into full-time trading.
So you ran this business. I support that majorly. This whole podcast is on people who have started businesses. So I really enjoy that you had a business before you got into trading.
Yeah, I had a business before. And like that's a difficult thing as well, right? To like, people automatically assume that the business, might be something wrong with the business if you want to stop it. So like that was a really difficult thing to have that conversation with friends and family, to say like, look, like I don't want to carry on with the business. I want to do this now instead. And what I'm leaping into is this huge unknown, but I think I'm good enough to get through it. And that's like a really difficult conversation to have.
Oh, I bet, because I think a lot of people, they see you, stopping this business and they don't realize that there are more profitable ventures out there, and they kind of just assume, you're giving up this money-making opportunity. But to be honest,
and like especially having that conversation with a parent, like that's particularly difficult, because like I mentioned trading and I mentioned like cryptocurrency, and like my mum is very much one of those people that's like, I see it in the news and it's a scam. So like having that conversation about like, I want to do this. That was a particularly difficult conversation, but as I said, we're some time in now and everything's going well on that side. So I think everybody's happy that I made the leap.
Yeah. It sounds like you're killing it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've had my success, and certainly in the last couple of months, things have been very good. But that whole decision to leave a business, and it isn't something that I took like lighthearted, right? Like it has to be a very thought out decision. Like I had to plan every aspect of what my trading journey looked like from that point onwards. So like, what's my daily profit return need to be? Like, what's my salary cut look like for the short term? What does my ability to hold a sort of financial position look like over 6 months, 12 months? How do my bills and my mortgage look like? All of those decisions. So like it was a huge amount of planning that went into it. It wasn't just something I could just flick a switch and say, okay, I'm a trader now.
Yeah.
So like it's a long process.
Of course. I feel like so many people see trading as this kind of glamorous lifestyle where, money's just rolling in, but you have, a child and you've got, responsibilities. So
yeah, I knew you were going to drop the R word on me then. It's really true. Yeah.
I mean, I think we all do, but I'm a bit younger, so when I told people, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to be working on my businesses full time, they're like, hey, you're young, you don't have too many things that are tying you down. You don't have, a wife, kids, a mortgage. I'm like, it's all relatively easy for me if it doesn't work out. But okay, so you started trading about 2 years ago. Is it
started trading full time 2 years ago?
Full time, yeah. There we go.
I've been trading a lot longer, but it's all good.
Okay, so do you primarily focus on crypto now, or are you still trading traditional markets as well?
So I started in traditional, and there's a good reason that I left that. My system works particularly well in crypto, because it's a divergence based system. The peaks and troughs that we get in crypto and the volatility in the market mean that I usually am able to position quite well, whereas traditional markets have always been a bigger challenge for the system. So when I went into this creation process of mapping this out and deciding exactly how I wanted to trade full time, crypto was kind of just the hand in hand sort of opportunity for me. And I think as well that you need a huge amount of information on any markets that you're trading. You can't just walk into I just can't walk into FX and just be like, okay, yeah, here's a support level, I'm going to trade off this. There's so much more that I need to know, that I think that my brain could only handle a certain amount with how specialized I wanted to be with the system. So it was just making sure that crypto, I knew so much about already. I'd spent so long in the markets that was the one that I knew I could apply to.
There we go. Yeah. So you've kind of got it mapped out. You've found your area of expertise in a sense. And it works for you. So yeah, that kind of gets into my next question. So, you figured out that, okay, your system works extremely well in the crypto markets. So can you just talk to us a little bit about your area of expertise and kind of where you make the most money trading, and that system, that, divergence-based system that you were talking about? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I'm primarily a renko, which is kind of an unusual thing to hear. There's not many renko traders that are visible in this space at all. Renko is a system that basically strips back price action. Okay, so when I first started trading a number of years ago, I was one of those people that get very caught up in the narrative behind candles. So I'd be sitting at home on the PC looking at a chart, and I'd look at a 5-minute chart, and I would put a narrative behind each of the candles that I saw. So every time that I'd see a wick to the downside, a wick to the upside, I'd be creating these pictures in my head about what was happening and what that was telling me. And actually, I find that was one of the biggest sort of negatives about my trading, is I was far too easily affected by what was happening visually and what I was seeing take place on those lower time frames that I was trying to become profitable on. So I made the move to renko, which kind of strips everything away. It just leaves me with a very raw version of price, and therefore it takes away any bias that I have. It leaves me with underlying price action, and so it enables me to see more clearly the picture that's being painted for me. So that was one of the biggest things about taking up renko. And obviously there's not many people in this space that utilize renko, whereas I think there should be a lot of people in this space that utilize renko, because I think it would help a lot of people. But the system itself works on the basis of lower time frame scalping. So I work with anything from a 1 second chart upwards. So primarily if I'm trading Bitcoin or Ethereum, I'll be using a 1 second chart, and we'll be trading divergences off that. So I'm using RSI divergences, and I will also use a moving average or a guppy in order to support that trading style. But essentially what I'm looking for are local bottoms, local tops, small turns in the market that I can take advantage of. And my system makes it very robotic in terms of how I trade that. So there is zero emotion that goes into my trading. It's actually a relatively boring style, okay, which is why I tweet so much, because that gives me an outlet to spam some memes. But it's a pretty systematic approach. It's the system tells me to short, I short. The system tells me to long, I long. And it's kind of as simple as that. Like, there's no emotion, there's no narrative. It's simply system says this, do this.
There we go. Okay, so yeah, you covered a few things there. I kind of just want to do a bit of a recap. I like to do a recap for my audience just so that they can really, get it drilled into their head.
And apologies, I talk so much. Like, once you get me started, that's
no. That was actually relatively short for a lot of the answers I get. So I do appreciate when my guests go into detail, because I always say this: you're the expert. I'm having you on to talk about whatever you're most knowledgeable about. I don't really know too much about renko trading, so I appreciate that you come on and you go into detail about it. But yeah, I mean, like, when I'm on Twitter, I see you on Twitter, I don't see a lot of people discussing renko or using it. It's primarily candlesticks. And, I don't know too much about it. Pretty much, my knowledge of it is that there's no fixed time frame on the... I wouldn't even know what to call it. It's not a candlestick, but it's primarily...
You can call them bricks.
Bricks, there we go. Yeah, that's what they are. Okay, yeah, so it's not... A new brick doesn't pop up each time, like, a 5 minute or an hour, whatever time frame you're on. It's primarily or solely based on how much the price moves. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in that. It's if you're using something like TradingView, which I imagine the vast majority of people are, there's basically two prerequisites. Number one is that price has to move a certain amount in order to paint a brick on screen. And then the second thing is it has to happen within a certain time frame. Now, like, if we're using a renko chart that may be away from TradingView, it will just work solely on price. So actually, if each brick represents a $10 movement on Bitcoin, we will see no bricks print if that price movement only goes up to $9.99.
There we go.
Right? We see nothing. There's no movement in the chart. It just stays exactly as it is. So we only get it with very sort of clear movements that we sort of plan out. And we have the values assigned for that, for what we'd like to see on screen. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no... If you look at the date on a renko chart, like, it's completely pointless. There's no need to have any date or time on there.
But there are dates just to kind of give you some sort of overview of
so you can see particularly volatile months, for example,
exactly.
Like, because they'll be represented sort of more heavily. But like, I was looking the other day at the Litecoin daily chart, and I think the action over the past 3 months is like equivalent in the space on the chart to all of March of last year.
Jesus.
So like we just like condensing these 3 months down, whereas March last year was like particularly volatile.
There we go.
So like there's lots of action there. So yeah, it's useful to get some information from, but renko traders don't need time or data.
There we go. Okay, yeah. Sorry to dumb it down for you. Obviously, exactly what's going on, but I mean, for my audience, like you said, and like I said, we don't really see too much of it on Twitter, so my audience probably isn't too well versed in it either. So I was just trying to dumb it down as much as possible there.
And any explanation you want is all good. You can fire those across.
Of course.
Anything like that. I'm still an educator at heart, so
I was
any
gonna say
opportunity for me to like talk is like this is my element.
Yeah. This is kind of right up your alley. So I appreciate you coming on and helping us and teaching the community. But okay, so you said that you kind of created this narrative when you were looking at candlestick charts, and then you talked about this idea that you have a very strict trading system and you've kind of removed all emotions from it, which in my opinion is probably the hardest thing to do as a trader. For most people, they can understand, okay, this is this pattern or this is how price is moving, but what they can't do is take their emotions out of the equation. And I think that's where a lot of people run into trouble. So it sounds like your system has kind of removed that. So I kind of want to elaborate on that a bit. So for anyone who doesn't know Cold-Blooded Shiller, he has been absolutely killing these trading competitions lately. I've seen him at the top of the list, in the last couple weeks. I've seen it at the top of the list at least twice. I think the last one he just turned $100 into $2,600 in what was that, like 2 days?
Yeah, 48 hours. Yeah.
Absolute madness, man. So, you kind of talked about this trading strategy that you have that's based on, RSI divergences and then like a moving average or a guppy. And it allows you to kind of take your emotions out of the trading. But can you just kind of elaborate a little bit on the trading strategy that you use for these competitions? Because they're quick. You're absolutely like degen longing, shorting these quick movements. You're working on the 1 second. So can you just elaborate and talk about what it really takes to win these trading competitions?
Yeah, so I think that like when you're scalping, so that's the primary focus when I was in this competition. Okay, I was aware that I had 48 hours, obviously, to turn this $100 into whatever total I could get to finish first. So the biggest thing that I'm aware of in this is that number one is that I need to take as many movements as I possibly can. So as many signals that the system can give that I'm able to take, I need to be able to move in on. And one of the biggest things is that when you're scalping, people lose focus on the bigger picture. So even though I'm down on the 1 second chart, I need to be aware of what the higher time frames look like. And I also need to be aware of what the higher time frame levels are. So if, for example, the 1 second chart tells me that I should enter in a long position, but on the higher time frame, I know that we're up against a daily resistance level, then I need to be aware of what impact that can have on the scalp position I'm about to take. So it's incredibly important to keep focus on the wider picture, even though you're dialed down to such like a micro level on the chart. You need to be aware of what is happening in the bigger picture. So that was the first thing. And in the trading competition, I was very much aware. I've been bearish for a long time on crypto in general. And I was very much aware that I was waiting for a breakdown of some sort. So I was looking solely for short positions that I could take. And I was basically looking at pushing short positions as far as I could. So there was one point in the tournament where I was measuring the moves that I could take on certain assets. So I was looking quite heavily at EOS during that time, because EOS had one of the strongest runs up, and it also had one of the largest gaps back down. And I didn't think too many other people in the competition had potentially identified that point. So I was aware that there was a huge percentage gain for me to make if EOS did crumble. And I think that EOS did it do like 30% down in that day. So like it had this like huge tumble. And I was very much planning for that move. So that awareness of the higher time frames really sort of helped me out, even though I'm dialed in, waiting for my entry, waiting to take the position. I'm aware of what that asset looks like on a higher time frame and where I can squeeze the most value from. So I took that EOS short, and that was one of my biggest gains in that. And actually, I cut that EOS short way too early. I could have taken that for considerably more, and then I had to mess around a little bit more to get ahead in the competition near the end. But yeah, essentially, it's a case of making sure you're very aware of the higher time frames, but operating on a lower time frame, and then squeezing as much value as you can from a market that you either know is trending down or expect to trend down.
You always hear about people saying, zoom out, but that's for, most people like to think of that as like if you're investing or, trying to get rid of any, doubt in your mind. But you're here trading the 1 second charts, and you're still using these daily charts to kind of find the right levels. So, I mean, I don't do as much trading, and I'm definitely not trading the 1 second charts. But I feel like you can get so caught
Come along, man. Come along. Let's try it out.
I think I'll leave that to the psychopaths like yourself. because I feel like I would just get way too caught up in the weeds. But so your main point there was that you need to really, if you are trading these very, very small time frame charts, you still need to make sure that on the higher time frames, you understand, if we're bearish or bullish. And you said that you were very bullish for the last few months and you were waiting for that breakdown. And it seems like you caught it pretty perfectly, especially with EOS. And, that's another thing that I like. A lot of people get caught up trading, one specific asset, and you're out here looking for any asset that you can to either short or long. And it ended up, you did say that you cut it a bit short, but it ended up, like you were saying, having a 30 or so % move down. So you haven't.
So that 30% netted me 300% in the competition.
There we go.
Because of the assets we were trading. Yeah. So that was a 300% move for me. But as I said, that awareness of the higher time frame was the most important thing. Plus, also, if you are involved in any competitions, any tournaments, also having a strategy or an approach to come at it from. This tournament was all about trading 10x leverage tokens. So for every 1% move in the market, there was a 10% move on these tokens. So it was very much for me about identifying where are the biggest percentage gaps, right? That was first thing I had to do. As soon as we have the percentage gap and I can view which assets have the largest gap down, then I can start trading on the back of that, because that automatically gives me my hit list that I need to move in on to get the most gains. So having some form of strategy if you are entering into any competitions is also pretty important.
Yeah, this was, based on 10x moves. So you're like, all right, I'm going to look for those big gainers, and to come in with that strategy is absolutely key. So we didn't really get into it too much yet, but can you just talk to us about how you kind of take your emotion out of the equation? I know you said your strategy kind of allows you to do that, but can you just give my audience some tips on how, they can kind of try to take the emotion out of trading?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I don't know, especially people who are, newer to trading, when they see this kind of drop off and sell off of any sort of kind, their emotions really get the best of them and they end up selling. They don't really have this strategy that you're talking about. So maybe you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things when it comes to managing your emotion in trading. The first is, and it's always, I always feel bad saying it because I've been asked this question a number of times, but the first thing that you have to do is remove yourself from any social media. Right, you have to step away from noise and from distraction and from any conflicting sentiment statements to what you believe. So the other thing is that after we get these large moves, everybody feels as though they have to make a decision in the moment. So when we drop, like we did on Bitcoin, we dropped 10%, and everybody suddenly feels like they now have to take a position. Whereas that isn't the case. The majority of the money is made after that next consolidation, certainly from my perspective. So anytime that we have dips in the market, we have pumps in the market, I utilize those as giving me opportunities. So rather than watching a pump or a dump happen and panicking about getting involved in that, about moving in on it while it's in motion, instead use that as an opportunity to start preparing for when it finishes. So if you can try and change your mindset around that sort of FOMO aspect around big moves in the market, and instead start to change it to, this is now creating an opportunity for me to look at, analyze, and then make a decision once it's calmed down. And that's kind of what we see a lot of. We saw that perfectly play out on Bitcoin. So we saw the original drop down, then we saw this patch of consolidation, and then we saw a second leg. And it's in those moments that we make the decision that nets us the returns. That's one of the biggest things that you can do, especially if you're somebody that moves very quickly when the market is moving. You sort of are panicking to get into a position. I can promise you that the money is not made during those drops. It's preparing for what happens after. after those drops or the moves up take place.
There we go. So those are two huge ones right there. It's going to be really hard to hear for some people, but the fact that you need to remove yourself from social media and any of these kind of outside biases is huge on taking any position.
I always give this reference, right? I'm a big fan of Wyckoff and Wyckoff trading sort of methodology. And, Wyckoff was trading over 100 years ago. And when he would go and chart, he would basically take himself off into a room by himself, and he would just get away from any news, any speculators that were discussing what would happen in the markets. And he would go off by himself, chart, and place his trades, decide what he was going to do, and then come back and join the rabble, right? And 100 years later, we have exactly the same process that needs to take place, but we just have 1,000 times more distraction. So we just have information at our fingertips, and it creeps into your mindset more than you can ever imagine. So I've always kept that Wyckoff approach that if 100 years ago he had to do that because somebody would be waving around a newspaper with market prices on, right? And that was his form of distraction. And you imagine what we have to deal with now.
It's insane.
It's even more important to sort of step back and just look at charts yourself.
I mean, if you're on social media, especially Twitter, for more than 5 minutes, you'll definitely see a post, especially, if you're following a lot of other traders, you'll see posts on, okay, I'm bearish right now, I'm bullish right now, I'm neutral right now. And all of that kind of sinks into the back of your mind and has an effect on the position that you take. So you said you try to stay off social media before the fact. Are you able to get back on and not have anyone else's opinions and tweets and bias affect you once you've entered a position?
It's still a challenge.
Okay.
Like hand on heart, if I'm honest, right? I had to, especially somebody who I would respect in the field.
Yeah, that's got to be tough.
And so now the way that I try and deal with this is I try and open up a conversation with that person. Okay, so I have a group of people that I'll chat with regularly and share ideas with. And if somebody has an opposite bias to me or an opposite play out for a trade that I'm taking, then I love to hear their side of it, because I think there's an opportunity for me to learn in that moment. So if they come forward and say, here's why I'm bullish, and I say, here's why I'm bearish, what can we learn from each other's analysis in a constructive way that may help me to see any flaws, may help them to see any flaws? So that's kind of the way that I try to overcome that. I'm still taking my trade, and I will always do that. But it's an opportunity to learn, what does the other side think, rather than just spamming comments on Twitter. It actually gives a learning environment to look at. So
it sounds like you stick with your convictions and you aren't making any changes once you've made your trade, but then there is that learning opportunity after the fact, because no one's got 100% strike rate. It may work out in your favor, and the person on the opposite side of your trade may have something to learn from you, or it could be the opposite of that, where you've taken a losing trade and now there's something to learn from the other person.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is if you just allow your own analysis to be shaped by the thoughts of others, okay, you've got no point of reference in order to better yourself as a trader. So the fact that I could say, okay, Charles took a long position, all right, so I'm going to join him in taking a long position, and then we get stopped out, and then I just turn around and say, well, it's Charles's fault. He told me, he said that long was good here, right? So there's never a fallback to me in that situation. That's straight on you. So I can always put it off. I can always give an excuse for why I took a trade that didn't work, because I just push it onto the other person who I followed. So you have to analyze yourself, and then you can look back and you can critique your trade afterwards, but at least you don't have an easy fall guy that you just point the finger at.
It's funny because you've just described probably 90% of Twitter, and their ability to just put the blame on somebody else. And, that's also kind of going, I don't want to get into the whole paid group thing, but I feel like a lot of people fall prey to that when they join paid groups. But that's beside the point. Let's not get into that. Another big thing you talked about there was, taking your time and not reacting to these huge movements. Because I think a lot of novice traders see this. Bitcoin was down almost 20% in a single day. And yes, if you can capitalize on that move, you can make, great money. But it's the movements after the fact that's where the real money's made. And so just taking your time, taking a step back. It's funny because, you look at Twitter the day after one of those movements and everyone is losing their goddamn mind. And if you take a look at the charts and the commentary from some of the more respected, well-known traders on Twitter, they're always very calm. They're always saying, all right, this is what we do now, instead of reacting to this huge move. So I appreciate that. Thank you for those tips. I really appreciate that. So let's kind of move forward. What are you most excited for in the coming 12 months? I like to ask all of my guests this, and it's usually a time where they talk about, the businesses that they've got, but you're a trader. So what are you looking forward to in the next 12 months?
I'll touch on a couple of things here. I recently partnered up with FTX, the exchange. So this is who I competed in the tournament with. Was these guys.
I'm actually having.
They've been.
I'm having one of their guys on, probably sometime next week to do an interview on Moon and Doom competition, or
Moon and Doom at the moment, and then first week of October, Battle Royale.
There we go, Battle Royale. That's what it is. So
the Battle Royale's on in October, so it runs for 5 weeks essentially. The first week is a practice week, and then we've got 4 weeks of trading competition afterwards. It's a really cool concept. The bottom 50 traders get knocked out at the end of each week, and so it's basically just one long-lasting tournament over the space of 4 weeks, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Right, it's a good opportunity for long-term profitability over a month rather than a degen 48-hour competition. And the other thing that's kind of cool with this, and I'll plug myself during this part, is you can stake traders. So you can go on to FTX and you can put money behind a trader you think will do particularly well in the tournament, and then you get a percentage of their profit as they move through the tournament. The money that you put behind a trader is essentially like free money. It comes back to you. So if you were to put money behind me, for example, and I got knocked out in week 1, then nothing would happen. You would have your money returned to you. So it's a good opportunity to potentially put some money behind somebody who you think is going to do particularly well in the tournament. And it's just another little potential income stream, and utilizing some of the currency you may just be holding that's doing nothing at the moment.
So there is that month-long competition that you're talking about. It's the Battle Royale. Is Sam the CEO? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Sam. Okay, that's who it is. So yeah, I'm actually having Sam on as my next guest after you. And we're actually going to be getting into the details of that and the whole, gamification of, crypto trading.
It's kind of interesting, right? Because during when I was running the business, gamification was just starting to become a huge trend in education. So that was kind of where I made my first biggest steps, because I'm a gamer at heart.
There we go.
I'm a big video game player. So gamification and utilizing that has always been a big part for me. So it's kind of interesting to see the way that's creeping into crypto and the way that we're doing this now, and especially with the activity that's going on Twitter. Like, we're seeing a lot more, especially over the last month or so, a lot more of these sort of competitions and chances to prove yourself, and there's some really cool stuff happening.
Yeah. It's I feel like it's kind of bringing some life back to the markets. Things were slowing down a little bit on Twitter, and now we've got a competition every single month where traders can just go crazy. And like you said, these 2-day competitions where you just go degenerate as fuck, and then Now you have this month-long competition that's coming up, and you talked about, the fact that you can stake your FTT. It's FTX, sorry, FTX.
I think you can use Ether, right? I think FTT is the tag that I always use.
There we go. Okay, that I could be mistaken there, but okay. So you said you can stake it on specific people. Does that add any extra stress to you to know that people are, kind of trying to ride your coattails?
Yeah. So I'm currently the most staked entrant.
Oh God.
On there. So there's currently around $700,000 behind my name.
Wow. Okay. I mean, so you talked about how there's no real loss if you don't do well. Traders will get their money back.
That gives me that makes sure that my heart doesn't skip a beat every time I look at the page, right? So that's okay. I'm kind of chilled about the fact that this isn't lost money. Yeah. Should I go and blow this? I have no intention of blowing this.
No.
I have intention of making a lot of people richer. But it chills me out a little to know that it isn't just this capital that somebody's thrown in behind my name, and I'm now sitting with that on my back as well. The best position I want to be in is trading without any concerns about money being attached to me. And then I can just go in and trade the system as I usually would. I'm really pleased that the money gets returned.
Yeah. That definitely takes a weight off your shoulders.
Yeah.
All right, man. So we've gone over a lot. We talked about your background. We've talked about your trading system. We've talked about, the fact that you need to remove your emotions and how to properly trade these competitions. We've got another competition coming up, the Battle Royale, that you're very stoked for. So can we just wrap this up with your biggest tip for anyone who's trying to, one, get into trading, and then more specifically for people who are trying to be successful at these trading competitions? What's your biggest tip for them?
So I think that the biggest thing that I would say is this is a marathon. This is not something you can walk into and win a 100-meter sprint and that's it. You're made for life. Okay. If you have a huge amount of capital to invest, then sure, you can make some great returns. If, like when I started, right, I had a decent capital pool that I was willing to invest in crypto, and I did that. It's about managing your money well and understanding that if you can manage your risk for a long period of time, you will make money in this space. So there's a 2% rule that I try and work by, which is if I can make 2% of my account per day, then I'm done trading. I'm happy with that. And a lot of people were surprised by this. I started to document this on Twitter. But if you start with a $10,000 starting capital and you make 2% per day on that, which, isn't hugely unrealistic to make 2% per day. Some days are going to be more, some days are going to be less. But it will take you around 240 days to turn that 10K into $1 million. And people are really surprised by that figure because they want quick wins right now. Okay, they want to turn that 10K into 100K by tomorrow evening. Whereas that's not realistic. But if you can manage your capital and if you can trade with sensible risk management, there is every possibility that you can turn some very good cash here. It's all about greed not taking over.
So then again, that gets back to the whole having control over your emotions. And I really like that saying, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Because, slow and steady, like you just said, with that whole 2% rule, and turning 10,000 into $1 million in less than a year.
People forget that stuff, man. I think it's very difficult. And again, without bashing on Twitter, but it's quite difficult to go on and watch successful guys who trade with big stacks, to watch them turning money. And this whole cycle around, missing moves, missing out on money, doubling down on your next position, losing that, quad on your next position. There's just this vicious cycle around it, and people don't realize just how much money they bleed hopping in and out of positions. And if you're trying to preserve an asset like Bitcoin, if you trade with Bitcoin as your capital, then your most important thing should be to hold on to that Bitcoin. Don't let the market take it off you easily. So again, like it's all just part of this whole like umbrella of social media and the way it impacts psychology.
Oh yeah, I if I have one tip for anybody, it's stay off of these social media sites.
But then they never find you.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate you kind of just giving us this one big tip for anyone who's trying to get into trading. What about for these people who are trying to kill these trading competitions? Because that's less of a slow and steady and more of a this is a sprint.
Yeah. Hard and fast.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, like if you're trading in any, you need to come at it with an approach, okay, with a strategy. Like I planned for that 48-hour competition. I knew it was coming. I knew the kinds of positions I wanted to take. But essentially, you need to come out at it with a strategy. You've got a fixed period of time in order to make gains in, which is very different to normal trading. Okay, so whereas I've got a lifetime, I've now got 48 hours to make some money. The other thing that I would say is in these competitions, be sensible with how you are using the entry money. So, for example, it was $100 here. So my aim was very much to use 100% of my bankroll for every single trade.
There we go.
So the first trade I entered $100 in, say I returned 200, then I would put the full capital into the next trade, because then I'm starting to really snowball my gains. So you just have to be sensible in how you approach things, and just take half an hour to plan out what you want your approach to be. It's basically setting up for success, kind of that.
Yeah. So have that strategy before you go into the competition, stick to it, and to be honest, just be kind of a degenerate. You're saying you're risking, everything with every single trade, which is kind of the only way that you're going to be successcul in these 2-day competitions. You're not going to
you still have your stops in place,
of
but
course.
Like I'm still putting 100% of that bankroll in to each trade. And that I think that's one of the only ways that with these tournaments. And the other thing that I like, somebody made a post, and this is the last thing because otherwise I'll keep you for another day, Charles. But somebody put out a tweet to say this is how like we should choose whose group to join, right? In like a paid group sense. And like I just went back and said, like, these tournaments are not representative of any trader strength. So regardless of me winning that tournament, and I appreciate the sentiment, it's not something you should be looking at and saying these are the best traders because they did this. Like, this is degenerate trading. It's like it's no way to utilize your capital. So like it's pretty much who got luckiest over 48 hours, who set up really well, right? Who took advantage of it, but it's certainly not now who's the best trader.
100%. Again, it goes back to that whole idea of it's a marathon for the long-term trading. And these short little guys are just little sprints. So, I mean, it does speak to you as a trader and the fact that you are able to be, highly successful in these competitions. That's definitely saying something, but I don't think it speaks to your long-term strategy. Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine. I was just going to agree with what you were saying. I think you're absolutely spot on in that.
There we go. And then last thing before we wrap up, I threw up a little tweet. It was a little bit early. It was just hey, 30 minutes from now, I'm going to be hopping on a call. And Smokey Trades, his handle's Smokey XBT. He just had a question.
I know Smokey.
Yeah, so he had a question for you. And the question is, how do you handle having a kid, trading, and then whatever you do on the side? And how do you allow that to not affect your trading performance? And I think we kind of touched on that in the episode.
But so like I guess it. Go on, Charles. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, man.
Oh no! I was just gonna say specifically with having a young child. I think that's the biggest, distraction I would say from trading. So kind of how do you just deal with that?
So I think that when my baby's 5 weeks old now.
Oh wow! Okay, and so like an infant.
We are fresh, man. Like we are hallucinating from levels of non-sleep. So like the biggest thing for me is it probably increased my want to hustle. So having him arrive was kind of like, oh shit, I need to make sure that I'm more focused than ever. So for me, it kind of wasn't a thing that ever made me worry about my approach and how I do things. It was actually something that made me just focus even more. So I think that ability now to be able to have something that I know is incredibly important to me in order to achieve and to do well. It's just given me more focus, and I think that, like I said, the having the ability to trade without emotion means that I don't need to pull in all these factors, because it would be super easy for me to sit there and think, I really need to make sure this next trade is profitable because I've now got a child and my wife who are relying on me to make sure this is a success. Whereas I know that the system works and I just can't get bogged down in that emotional side of it. I know that at its core, if I follow the system, I will be profitable. And so it's really just continuing to implement that, and in the nicest possible way, apart from the increased focus, not letting it become a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that, and you say in the nicest possible way, because this is your child.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm kind of like I'm
it's a
kind of
distraction.
like, don't think about him. Don't think about him. Like, he doesn't exist for when I'm trading.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically just that. Like, if you thought about all of the outcomes to like a trade, to like what your salary looks like at the end of the month, etc. Like, that plays a huge sort of toll on how you're going to be trading and your ability to action trades. So yeah, it's kind of just keeping it at the back of your mind.
Yeah.
But then obviously just being a dad when you're not at school.
Of course, yeah.
And like, I love you, but for when I'm trading, like, I've got to make you disappear.
Yeah, of course. I really like what you said about, it's less of a distraction and more of what fuels you. And it's made you want to hustle harder, as you said, because you now are providing. But then the biggest thing that you just talked about was, again, leaving your emotions at the door and really, separating yourself from everything when you are trading. So I think that has got to be the biggest takeaway from this whole talk, at least for me. I'm hoping others see it that way as well. But okay, I think we've got everything. I really appreciate, you taking the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we go?
No, I'm aware that I kept you here long enough.
No. I'm looking at the time right now. We're at 48 minutes. There was a little bit at the beginning that gets cut out, so it should be right around 45 minutes, which is perfect for me.
All right, cool. So I think that the last thing from my perspective is, I know that we touched on sort of what I'm excited about coming. So the only other thing that I'd like to add there is that like I said to you at the start, I ran a business that was primarily based on education. And what I try and do now in this space is to make people the best traders that they can possibly be. So I currently have an educational group that I run that attempts to do this. So we're trying to turn people into better traders. We're trying to teach people a system in order to trade from. So over the next 12 months, essentially what I am looking to become is a legitimate person in this space. So like we've touched on paid groups, paid services, and what they, what the pros and cons are of those. And I think for me, it's incredibly important to continue being transparent, to continue to be approachable, to communicate in the right way, and to make sure that people can see that there are legitimate people in this space that can offer value. So over the next 12 months, it's kind of like continuing down that route. So it's why a lot of the relationships with people like FTX are so important to me right now, is that I still have a passion for education and for people learning.
Yeah.
And so, the ability to not have a post that I make about a group or a service become a meme will be like, that will be an important turning point for me. Like, and I know that's not going to happen easily, but that is the goal that I'm working towards, to show that, there are people in this space who are willing to help and can assist. So that for the next 12 months is going to be a really key focus.
Yeah, it's a bit of an uphill battle just because of, I want to say like the scammers of the industry have kind of turned it into this, there's this stigma against people with paid groups. But it's actually
100%.
It's funny because when I asked, what you're most excited for, and then I remembered your background in education, I was like, these two go hand in hand. You're someone who used to, that was your business. You were an educator, and then you're now killing these competitions, making huge sums of money. Why not put them together? But it sounds like that's where you're headed. And, people have seen your gains. You've been very transparent. And so I think that you are going to have a less hard time than a lot of other people kind of putting together a group like this because, your strategies are tried and tested. And
and it's longevity as well, right? Like it's quite easy. We see a lot of people for 3 months and they disappear.
Yeah.
And they could have taken sums of money off people in that space of time. Yeah. So it's about longevity, which is why the next 12 months are important. It's about continuing to do that, continuing to be a presence here, because otherwise I just fade in like everybody else does.
Exactly. And I think you are seen as one of the more respected traders on Twitter at least. And I've spoken with them. I
appreciate that. Even if that's your opinion and what you've heard from others, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've had DMs and I've talked to people and said that you're coming on, and they've been like, wow, okay, I really appreciate and respect him as a trader. So congrats on getting that interview set up. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I wish you all the best of luck with getting that group together. I think you're going to see wild success with it. That could just be my opinion, but congrats, and
I appreciate it.
Again, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, man. It was great to be here, honestly.
All right, guys, that wraps up another episode, and I just want to take a quick second to ask you a huge favor. If you found anything in the episode helpful, or it's been inspiring to you in any way, I just ask that you share it with your friends, family, anyone you know on social media, and hopefully we can help them out as well. Have a good one.